From the low desert in beautiful Tempe, Arizona, and the snowy, cold plains. Yeah, this is Politics and the Past with Robert Ferguson and Jack Hinrichs. We today we're going to discuss we're going to go back to one of our favorite episodes that everybody seemed to love, which was Jack's granular analysis of South Dakota politics. South Dakota, the state that we called the most Republican state in the Union. And so we want to go back to discussing South Dakota politics. Some things have changed on the ground. And
Yes.
Jack, maybe most importantly, Jack is now on the ground.
I'm on the ground. The ground is very cold. It's very icy. I've come very close to slipping, but that is the kind of sacrifice I'm willing to make for the listeners of this podcast. I'm willing to get up to the edge of slipping and falling for you, the listener.
It's really funny. Whenever I go back north during the winter, like I almost forget how to walk on ice. I have to my
Mhm.
brain has to reconnect with
Yeah.
okay, here's how you walk. Here's how, you just sort of slide, when you're sliding, you don't even think about it,
Yeah. Mhm.
right?
Well, and the funny thing is, when you look at the analytics, most of the people who listen to this podcast are from Arizona, are from the Valley, and so they have no idea what we're talking about right now. They're sitting there thinking, "You walk different on ice?" I don't know that. Yeah.
If there's one thing that I know from people from the valley is that most of them started somewhere cold.
Okay. So, well, yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
We're all refugees from the ice and the cold.
That's a good way of putting it. That's a good way. Yeah.
All right. Anyway, so you're back in South Dakota. How
Mhm.
long have you been back now?
I've been back just short of a week.
Okay. All right. So just short of a week. What's the temperature today?
Well, today it's a little bit warmer. We're just above freezing. In the real temperature, the problem is the wind has picked up. And so we're sitting about 20, feels like temperature. So it's pretty balmy outside, I'd say. It was -8 a couple of days ago, and so we're moving on up. This is very beautiful weather for South Dakota this time of year.
Oh, you know what? I mean, here's the thing. I actually do love a warm day in the winter
Mhm.
when or a temperate day in the winter when you're in a northern plains environment.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's dig into what's going on in South Dakota. The last time we
Mm.
chatted, the governor's race was still sort of in early stages, but
Yeah.
recently, apparently, it started to take more tangible form.
Yes, it has. It is certainly um, taken on a form that sort of people had anticipated it was going to take. But now we can talk about it with certainty, which is bad for a political podcast. There's nothing a political podcast hates more than certainty. There's nothing to talk about. But it's certainly going to make for a more grounded conversation.
Sure. Okay. So, can you run through one more time? I mean, you did this a little bit on the last podcast, but
Mhm.
are you able to identify who the candidates will be for the Republican gubernatorial nomination of South Dakota? And can
Certainly
you
so.
give us a little bit of a background on each of them?
Mhm. So as a primer, you've got 4 candidates in total, or 4 notable candidates in total. 2 are from the establishment business conservative wing of the Republican Party, and then 2 are from the more MAGA populist wing. Let's start with the MAGA populists. So first you have John Hanson, who is currently the Speaker of the South Dakota House of Representatives. He is an attorney. He's long been affiliated with pro-life efforts in terms of combating pro-choice ballot measures and things of the like. So you have Speaker Hansen and then also Toby Doeden, who is a crypto millionaire who also owns a number of car dealerships and other business ventures from Aberdeen. And he and his money, especially, has played a very notable role in this MAGA populist movement, especially in legislative primary elections. So in the populist wing, it's Doeden and Hansen. And then with the establishment wing, first and foremost, you have Dusty Johnson. Dusty Johnson has been in South Dakota politics forever. He is currently the lone member of the U.S. House of Representatives from South Dakota. And he has wanted to be governor for a very long time, finally getting his chance to run. And then also in that wing, and this is what is bringing the newfound clarity to this gubernatorial race. Incumbent Governor Larry Roden, who was not elected governor, it should be noted, he was elected lieutenant governor under Christy Nome. And then when Governor Nome resigned and became Secretary Nome, uh, Governor Roden filled into the post. And so for a long time, Governor Roden was pretty cagey about whether or not he was running for governor. He wouldn't say yes, he wouldn't say no. And it lended a lot of an air of mystery to this governor's race. Now he has declared Governor Roden is running to stay governor against Representative Johnson, Speaker Hansen, and Toby Doeden.
All right, let's start with Larry Roden here for a second.
Mhm.
How, you know, what's the polling like on Larry Roden? Do people approve of his governorship? Are people upset with him?
That's a good question. When you look at the polling, and it's a small amount of polling that's been done since he became governor, and not a lot of
Sure.
pollsters poll South Dakota. There's not a
Right.
lot of money to be made there, I guess. But in the polls that have been taken, most South Dakotans, quite frankly, don't know that Larry Roden is their governor. His name ID is not fantastic. Those who do don't really have strong feelings about him. He's a nice guy. He's sort of the anti-Christy Nome, which is probably why she selected him in the first place. He's a nice guy. It's really hard to hate Larry Roden, and so there's not a lot of hate towards him as there would be against other candidates in this primary. So in the polling of the gubernatorial primary that has been conducted, there have been two or three high-quality public polls that have come out. Larry Roden and Dusty Johnson are both at about 30 to 35%, depending on the poll. And both Toby Doeden and Speaker Hansen are hovering at about 15%, again, depending on the poll. So it's Johnson and Roden in front, and then Doeden and Hansen nipping at their heels.
So anyway, so you got about a Johnson has about a third, Roden has about a third, and then Hansen and Doden are splitting about a third, correct?
Correct. Yep,
Okay.
that's the breakdown as of now.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the distinctions between these two or between the individuals within these two camps. Um,
Sure.
you said Toby Doden is from Aberdeen, right?
Yes.
Where is Aberdeen?
Aberdeen is up in the northeast corner of the state, and Speaker Hansen is from the Del Rapids, so that's in the Sioux Falls area.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So even though Hanson is sort of from that MAGA populist wing, he's from the
Mhm.
Sioux Falls area.
Yeah, and that is why I think he's been able to become such a prominent politician, where he is certainly from that MAGA populist wing. He has his roots and his ties there. But because he's from that Sioux Falls area and because he is an attorney, he has that sort of educational background and those institutional ties. So while he doesn't agree with members of the establishment wing, he can talk to them. And that is my yeah. Come again? Sorry?
We know him.
I do.
He's a known quantity.
Absolutely,
Sure.
absolutely. Yeah, and so especially within that House Republican caucus, when you're thinking about caucus elections, that makes it a lot easier for you to get the votes of your Republican colleagues.
Right. Okay.
Mhm.
Whether that will translate into votes in a primary is a little bit different.
It is a little bit different, and as of yet, it's not.
Right.
It turns out getting the votes of 60 House Republicans is very different than getting the votes of 300,000 rank and file Republican voters. Who knew they were different?
Right. Okay. Let me here's a question I hadn't considered.
Mhm.
I'm assuming primary it's like first past the post, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So all registered Republicans in the state of South Dakota can vote for the governor. could vote for the Republican, and it's whoever wins the plurality of those votes, correct?
Mhm. And it's also important to note that it is not an open primary. There are certain primaries. The one for the South Dakota Democratic Party, for example, is open to both Democrats and independents. The Republican primary is not. You must be a registered Republican to vote in that primary. Now, it is known there is a pretty prevalent phenomena amongst South Dakota individuals who would otherwise be South Dakota Democrats or South Dakota independents will just register as Republican because the Republican primary is effectively the only election. But if you are a Democrat or an independent in South Dakota, you cannot vote in that Republican primary.
Okay, all right. So where you know we've mentioned you mentioned before that the critical mass or the energy in the Republican Party is towards the more MAGA populist wing, which is in the rural parts of East River and then West River.
Correct.
And the rural parts of East River, if I recall correctly, are farming, and the rural and West River is more ranching.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. However, the population base is in Sioux Falls and the surrounding area and the surrounding booming areas.
About a third of the entire state population is within the 4 counties around Sioux Falls.
Okay. So in a statewide primary race, um, being popular in Sioux Falls is really important.
It is.
Even in a Republican Party that seems to be pulling away from Sioux Falls.
Absolutely. Both because a lot of the population is there, and fundamentally because the money is there. You know, you can, in theory, if it was just based on votes, you could win a Republican primary without much support from Sioux Falls. But
But
you
you'd have to
couldn't
win
fund a
everything else. But you'd have to win absolutely everything else.
correct. But you could not fund a competitive primary campaign without funding from Sioux Falls, especially given the harsh economic conditions around farming right now. I mean, farming is never a lucrative activity, but it's especially not a lucrative activity right now.
Sure.
And so, yeah, in order to run that competitive campaign, you must be getting money from Sioux Falls or be
Well,
used to sell.
or Toby Doeden.
Mhm. Or be Toby Doeden, and that self-funding, I think, does give him a pretty sizable edge over John Hanson in that primary.
Well, and also, you mentioned that Toby Doden's money has been a significant player in South Dakota legislative politics for a long time, or for a
Mhm.
couple of cycles now, right?
Yes. Mhm.
And as that's happened, uh, that's happening simultaneously with the energy moving out to the wings of the party that are outside of Sioux Falls.
Mhm.
I mean, is this maybe the first time for Republicans who are outside of Sioux Falls that they could, tap into a stable money source that doesn't involve playing nice in Sioux Falls?
It's certainly the first time in a long time. Toby Doden does give an interesting alternative revenue stream. There's sometimes been some money out of West River ranchers and out of the Rapid City area. And there's also a pretty significant tourist base out there. And the Black Hills is politically, it's politically far out. And so there's sometimes some money out of there, but Toby Doden is certainly a novelty in terms of that funding stream.
Okay, well, you can't leave me hanging there and not expect me to ask anything about Black Hills politics.
Mhm.
And
So
so, well, let's start first. Are the politics of like are the people who come out of Rapid City, are they more likely to be allied with the Sioux Falls crowd?
the it depends on the person. And a lot of it goes back to the economic base of Sioux Falls and Rapid City. In Sioux Falls, a lot of your economic growth is driven by banking, is driven by the trust industry. And so that naturally develops a business conservative, economic development oriented Republican elite. In Rapid City, you're talking about tourism. It's the gateway to the Black Hills. It's the gateway to Mount Rushmore. And so you don't have that same banking or insurance or trust tie. And so that gives you more flexibility in terms of your political affiliation. Certainly, there are Rapid City conservatives who are business conservatives. The mayor out there for a very long time was a man named Steve Allender, who is very much in that traditional business conservative wing. But you also have those more radical Republicans. And getting into the Black Hills as a whole, um, the Black Hills in West River, South Dakota has always had more far-right political tendencies. It was a hotbed for the John Birch Society, during the period that that was relevant to national politics. There's a story that Senator Jim Abrest, who was a Rapid City attorney and represented that area in Congress for a long time, tells a story in his autobiography of holding a town hall meeting in Newell, South Dakota, which is West River near the Black Hills. It's a isolated sheep farming community. And during this town hall meeting, the incumbent U.S. senator was leading. A sheep farmer stood up and turned to the crowd and asked when the crowd would finally build up the gumption to overthrow the federal government. And that is the sort of politics that has blossomed in West River, South Dakota, in the Black Hills.
Well, it's a not uncommon politics in kind of the mountain remote parts of the country, of all countries, frankly. And that's not saying anything about the people who live there. It's merely a consequence of when you live in an isolated area like that. It it It's the word I'm looking for here, because I it's not necessary. Again, I'm not. It's easy to cast aspersions on it, and I don't want to do that. Um, and it's because you're so accustomed to living without government in your life that it's easy to imagine that when government does start to enforce itself,
Mhm.
enforce things, it does seem authoritarian. And let's be honest, the government officials who you're most likely to have a problem with, if you are from one of these areas,
Mhm.
are the least likely to understand your way of life.
Sure.
I
Mhm.
mean,
And
in
that's
the
an
South
important.
in the South Dakota context, I mean, you get some University of South Dakota, um, academic who's
Uh-huh.
been to the Black Hills to go to Mount Rushmore, or maybe to see
Sure.
Deadwood, and that's about it.
Mhm.
And then they're gonna think they know how you live.
Absolutely. That and I appreciate that clarification. And it's also important to note that most prominent South Dakota politicians for a very long time, and this has changed somewhat recently, I would say within the past 20 years or so, but for a very long time, prominent South Dakota politicians would come out of East River. Um, Many of them, if you think of a figure like Niels Boe or Sigurd Anderson, or somebody of that nature, very well educated, often graduated from USD Law School, very well educated East River type. And when nothing against Niels Boe or Sigurd Anderson, who are fantastic governors and fantastic people, they just don't play well with West River Rangers.
They don't have the same they don't have a lot in common.
No, absolutely not. Very different lived experiences.
Right. Right.
Mhm,
Okay. So, um, we got onto the subject because we were trying to identify the the possible avenues for support you're going to find if you're not connected to the Sioux Falls elite.
mhm.
So, Hanson kind of straddles both, it
Yes.
seems, and
Mhm.
so does Roden.
Roden, because he comes out of West River, and for a very long time, he represented rural ranchers in the state legislature, he has a definite ability to speak to their interests and to speak to their concerns. He has so much experience in doing it. But also, because he has been a politician for a very long time, and because he has been able to build up those connections with establishment Republicans. And so he has the ability to talk to the MAGA populists who he represented in the state legislature. But through his connections and also in his temperament, he's simply not a flamethrower. He simply isn't the kind of person, he's not like Christy No, or he's not like Toby Doeden. He's not going to go out and be a Trump-like figure on the stump or in ads. And so in temperament and from his time in the legislature, he does align naturally with that business conservative wing of the party.
I think temperament's an interesting characteristic that you mentioned
Mhm.
because I think so frequently, um, you know, people get lumped in with the quote MAGA populists around the
Mhm.
country. It has nothing to do with their politics and everything to do with their temperament.
Absolutely,
Their
absolutely.
policies are all over the map. And in fact, their policies might sometimes overlap very well with what, more traditional establishment Republican figures. But if their
Mhm.
temperament's a little bit different, they get lumped in with that MAGA populist wing.
No, absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. So, um, Toby Doden's from Aberdeen, Hanson's from the Sioux Falls area.
Yeah.
All right. So, and you mentioned that Larry Roden, again, kind of establishment, but also can speak West River rancher.
Mhm.
Dusty Johnson. What's his power base in the state?
Dusty Johnson's power base is the establishment Republicans. Dusty Johnson has spent a very, very long time in the business conservative, economic development oriented circles. Dusty Johnson, before he was in Congress, he served on the Public Utilities Commission. As a member of the Public Utilities Commission, he naturally associated with business leaders. Before that, he was the chief of staff to Governor Dennis Dugard. And so he helped associate Dugard, raise money for Dugard, run Dugard's policies through individuals in that business conservative leadership. And so that is his power base is in Sioux Falls. It's with banking leaders. It's with trust leaders. It is with the individuals who ran the South Dakota Republican Party until recently,
Right,
until that MAGA populist surge.
right. And it's a well-funded part of the party.
Absolutely. Yes, there is plenty of money to go around.
Okay. So there's going to be a funding fight between Roden and Johnson,
Mhm. Yes, that would be fair to say.
but Johnson probably has the inside track.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. And then Hanson is trying to raise money off of MAGA populism, I'm assuming,
Mhm.
around the state. But
Yes,
and Toby Doden can do that and also self fund.
absolutely. And that I think is Toby Doden's great advantage
Right.
over John Hanson.
Okay. I think that's a pretty good lay of the land as far as each candidate's base and where they sort of sit on the map
Mhm.
of existing South Dakota politics. But you were mentioning to me yesterday that there are two very serious hot button political issues that
Yes.
are going to play a role in this race.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There, you mentioned the property tax issue and the carbon pipeline.
Mhm. Yep.
Why don't we start with the carbon pipeline? Because I don't know if there's as much there as the property
Sure.
tax issue. So let's start with the carbon pipeline. We also mentioned that in the first episode. So why don't we start?
Yeah, we'll discuss the carbon pipeline dispute, and this one is certainly older than the property tax issue. So a couple of years ago, an Iowa corporation became interested in running a carbon capture pipeline throughout eastern South Dakota to connect pipelines in North Dakota with pipelines in Iowa. In order to do that, in order to bury that pipeline under the ground, they would have to use eminent domain to get the land of all of the farmers from north to south across the state. So they contacted the Public Utilities Commission.
So quick
And,
question.
and
Quick question. Is this going through
sure,
East River or West River?
this is going through East River, South Dakota.
Okay.
So they contacted the Public Utilities Commission, which is run by establishment business conservatives, and that process started. But then a number of East River farmers learned that some of their land would be taken by the state for this Iowa corporation, and that this carbon capture pipeline would run under their land. And they became concerned about the environmental implications of the carbon capture pipeline, what that might do to the soil. And the science on that is still tentative, and it's not definitive about the impacts of having that under the soil. So the farmers became concerned both about the principle of not allowing an Iowa corporation to profit from their land, and also about the potential for environmental degradation. So a large movement spawned amongst East River farmers to combat this carbon pipeline. Now, this movement naturally combated against the Sioux Falls economic development conservatives who are all for the carbon pipeline. They saw it as an economic development engine. They saw it as a potential to boost the ethanol industry. And so they were for it, but the farmers were against it, which set up this war in the South Dakota Republican Party, which ultimately boiled over in a number of primary contests. Individuals like Toby Doeden and John Hanson supported a number of primary challengers to members of the state legislature who were for the carbon pipeline or even insufficiently against the carbon pipeline. And those state legislators got turned out in record margins in the previous couple of legislative primaries. And so that war has been happening within the Republican Party. It sort of died down recently. There have been some laws that have been passed to curtail the carbon pipeline, and notably, the Iowa company has dropped those plans to run that carbon pipeline through South Dakota due to the opposition that they've received. And so, because of those facts, the carbon pipeline battle has sort of subsided and been replaced by a dispute over property taxes. This is a movement that's happening across the country, notably in Georgia. This has recently come before the state legislature. A movement to reduce or eliminate the property tax burden that individuals face. Now, this is coming out of the fact that property values in South Dakota are rising, particularly in the farmland around Sioux Falls. So, over the past 20 or so years, the Sioux Falls metro area has exploded in population, and there's been a mass building rush in that region. And as a result, the property values for farmland around Sioux Falls has skyrocketed because all of a sudden they have value for potential housing developments or strip mall developments. But as a result of that, the property tax burden that those farmers are obligated to pay has gone through the roof. And we've previously talked about how the farming economy is just not robust currently. And so when you have these property tax burdens going through the roof, those farmers are seeking relief. They're seeking relief from the state legislature. The problem that they have in South Dakota, as opposed to a place like Georgia, is in Georgia, there are many other taxation streams to replace lost property tax revenue. In Georgia, you can get that both through increasing state sales taxes and through increasing the state income tax. South Dakota is one of the very few states that has no state income tax. And so, in order to replace property tax revenue, you're really the only alternative you really have is to dramatically raise state sales tax rates. And so that's a fight that those farmers, individuals seeking property tax relief, are having with economic development conservatives who absolutely don't want a state income tax and who do not want to raise state sales taxes because A, they rely more on the South Dakota state government funding or South Dakota state government services, and they don't want to see those curtailed. And they see a state sales tax or dramatically raising the state sales tax as something that could quench economic growth.
Sure. So what both of these issues have in common, the way that you've explained them to me, actually, I'll get that there in a second. Start here.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's easy to criticize landholders for not wanting for not wanting to pay property taxes,
Hmm.
especially when you can turn around and look at them and say, hey, listen, your land value's going up. Isn't that a good thing?
Hmm.
But if you're a farmer who wants to stay a farmer,
Mhm.
or you want your kid, or maybe you're thinking your kids want to be a farmer.
Mhm.
That can be the difference between you know, it, if if your property tax bill's skyrocketing, I know
Mhm.
ultimately that's based on a notional value of your land,
Mhm.
right? Value that you probably can't access, except to maybe
Mhm.
borrow against it to pay your property taxes.
Yes.
But it's not fundamentally related to your ability to produce farm commodities on that land.
Mhm.
And if what you want to do is produce farm commodities on that land, it it's a high property tax bill that's associated with a notional value of the land that's not related to your ability to to produce farm commodities
Mhm.
means that you're going to have to get out of the farm business.
Yes, absolutely.
And again, for a lot of people, you might think, well, maybe we don't need so many farmers, and this is the economic development side talking. It's like, well, you know what? You know this, Jack. I mean, I'm sure a lot of farmers in South Dakota are fourth or fifth generation farmers.
Yes, I come from a family, a long line of South Dakota farmers.
Right.
And an important thing to add to that, I appreciate that clarification. That's very important to remember, is that because you just need so much more land now to run a profitable farm.
Absolutely.
When
Yeah.
yeah, when my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents were homesteading in South Dakota, for example, you could make a living off of a quarter section.
No, there's no
Uh,
quarter section. There's very few. There's quarter section hobby farms now. There's no real quarter
yeah.
section farms.
No, now you need several sections in order and so
Maybe,
no
maybe dozens of them.
yes. And so to your previous point, no young person looking to get into farming can buy that much land,
Mm.
have to inherit it. And so these farmers are stuck between a rock and a hard place where in order to receive the finances from their increasing land value, you have to sell the land, but you can't sell the land if your kids or your grandkids want to farm.
Right. And a lot of parents probably just don't know if their kids want to farm, but they want to give them that option. They say, listen,
Mhm.
I'm going to farm, and maybe when my kid's 30, and my kids are going to take over the farm, maybe they want to keep it, maybe they want to sell it, but I want them to be able to make that decision. I don't want to make it for them. And high property
Rob, I lost you
tax
again.
bills make that make that difficult.
Mhm.
Um, So
Yep.
what we're seeing, I think, in both of these issues of both the carbon pipeline and with the property tax situation is this fight, and maybe this is a fight Republicans are having across the country, and we just don't know it because it's so buried underneath everything else.
Mhm.
Is this fight between heritage and economic development?
That's a fantastic way of putting it, I think.
That there are Republicans who I think have tended to dominate Republican, the C-suite
Mhm.
Republicans, even Main Street Republicans, Chamber of Commerce Republicans, who
Mhm.
seem to assume, I mean, uh, cards on the table. If I'm from a Republican wing, it's that wing.
Mhm.
Okay, cards on the table. Um, who see everything through the lens of economic development because it's always about trying to improve the standard of living for everybody, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yet on the other hand, you have Republicans and conservatives, and not just Republicans and conservatives at both parties, but for the sake of this conversation, we'll refer to Republicans and conservatives
Mhm.
who are like, listen, economic development's great. We're all for it.
Mhm.
But, you know, what's most important to me is still being able to farm.
Yes.
Or what's
Mhm.
most important to me is to still be able to run my small business that I've been running for 30, 40 years.
Yes.
And
And yeah. Well, and that mimics the battle that happened in the Democratic Party a little bit earlier, of heritage versus economic development or efficiency in the Rust Belt, where you had generations of steel workers, generations of auto workers, and the communities that were built around those industries got decimated because of neoliberal policies by the Clinton administration. And fundamentally, those policies led for the most efficient methods or most efficient manner of building cars and of working steel and those industrial jobs, but it did hurt the heritage, destroy the heritage in a lot of those areas.
Sure.
So you could almost see this Republican battle as sort of a Republican version of a fight that's already been fought within the Democratic Party.
Sure, and actually, I mean, here's where the old guy gets to jump in and say, the Rust Belt the Democratic rhetoric is often that the Rust Belt was created, in the 80s and 90s. The
Mhm.
Rust Belt is a consequence of the 1972 to 1974 recession.
Okay.
That's when it began. And I'm not correcting you, Jack, because you don't have any reason to know. But it's just worth remembering that it's 72 to 74, and it's coming out of going off the gold standard.
Okay.
And that's if you look at the 72 to 74 recession, virtually all of the manufacturing loss, job loss that it occurs in the Rust Belt happens in that period. And it just never recovers. The
Mhm.
factories are still there, like like the factories are still there and they're producing, but they're
Mhm.
limping along,
Yeah.
right? So anyway, but it is I think there is definitely this old battle between the unions and between the neoliberal Democrats
Oh,
of
yes.
the 80s and 90s
Mhm.
that we're seeing a different battle here. And you know
Mhm.
what? On some level, this is just an old political battle,
Yeah.
right?
Farmers fighting to one another.
Yeah, my research is in the period of the 1920s and 1930s, and it's all about industry versus farming.
Mhm.
And the farmers know that they're kind of fighting a losing battle from an economic development perspective,
Mhm.
but they want to
Absolutely.
still farm.
Yeah. Well, if you read the speeches of William Jennings Bryan,
Sure.
even
A
if
perfect example.
yeah, it, or if you read William Allen White editorials out of Kansas, like these are exactly the same grievances that
Yeah.
have been coming up.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just interesting that in 2025 here we have this heritage versus development battle being
Hmm.
waged in South Dakota in the South Dakota Republican Party. And again, maybe it's being waged across the country. And
Hmm.
we just because, Trump casts such a huge shadow and
Hmm.
there's, with Twitter and various other and other rhetorical like, so much rhetoric. This is buried, but maybe this is really fundamentally
Hmm.
what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's hard to get anybody
Yeah, forget
interested
it.
in talking about property taxes
Maybe there's
when you
something.
talk
Maybe
about
we
like
need to recover
it's
heritage.
just property taxes just aren't as interesting. Yeah. It's just difficult to get anybody interested in property taxes when you could talk about Donald Trump. But that's the value we bring you as a podcast. We're willing to do that for you.
Right? We're willing to get into the granular policy details.
Mhm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, the property tax issue, and if I recall you correctly, you mentioned that the big champion of abolishing the property tax is Toby Doeden.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And Toby Doeden from Aberdeen,
Mhm.
uh, pretty big landowner.
Toby Doden owns land, certainly. He has a lot of businesses within Aberdeen. So not as much farmland, I don't believe. I could be wrong about that, I suppose.
I didn't
But
ask you to
this,
audit Toby Doden's, tax statements before you.
I have his tax statements right here. They're right in front of me. And so if we have recorded this podcast at 11, I would have been able to go through those, but I just didn't have the time.
Fair enough. Okay. So he has been one of the loudest champions of abolishing the property tax, correct?
Certainly, a lot. There's some others. There's a married couple named the Muellers out of West River who have done some work on this, and others. But Toby Doden is certainly a prominent voice.
Okay. And he's going to try to ride that horse to the governor's mansion, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
How is John Hanson going to be able to manage that issue?
That is an excellent question because John Hanson is harmed somewhat by the fact that he has built those ties previously to establishment Republicans in order to win those caucus elections. And so he is not able to go as far as Toby Doeden is in denouncing property taxes. Um, and it isn't helped by the fact that property taxes just aren't John Hanson's issue. John Hanson's issue is abortion. That is the issue that he has made his name on. That is the issue in which his advocacy has been in. And traditionally in Republican primaries, that would be a safe bet, to be sort of the champion of pro-life forces. It just so happens that in this specific primary, it's property taxes. And so John Hanson is just caught on the back foot in terms of not being able to offer what Republican primary voters are interested in buying in this particular election. And his organization, his public persona is just not set up to accommodate that.
Interesting. Well, it probably splits apart his coalition,
Oh, absolutely.
which is dangerous. So what he has to do is he has to make sure that this primary is not fought on property taxes. It has to be fought on abortion.
Yes. Hmm.
Okay. So it's, Toby Doeden, you want to talk about property taxes, but it's just because you are uncomfortable talking about the fact that you've supported Planned Parenthood your entire life.
Hmm.
That's I would expect is going to be his approach here.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Larry Roden, where does he come down on the property tax issue?
That is a great question, to be
And by the way,
honest.
you might not want anybody to know where he sits on this issue.
Yes.
The only person who might want the world to know where he sits on this issue is Toby Doeden.
Yes, absolutely. Like the fact that I don't know where Larry Roden falls on the property tax issue, I think is indicative of his political strategy, in terms of wanting to straddle those two camps. Larry Roden, also, it's important to note, he has just gotten into the race here recently.
Sure.
He hasn't had the ability of Doden or Johnson or Hanson, who have been in this race for so long, to define himself on that issue. And so maybe given time, he'll put together a more articulate response, and he'll spend more time and money pushing that response out. I want to give him that opportunity. But as of today, he hasn't been fighting that battle. The battle that has been sucking up much of South Dakota politics here recently, and this is also something that we should note, and it's not something we talked about in the last podcast or even in our conversation yesterday, is there was a fight over South Dakota's new penitentiary. Um, and I think this is also deserving of an opportunity to talk about. It's another point of contention between the economic conservatives and the MAGA populists. The original South Dakota penitentiary in Sioux Falls. So, on the last podcast, we didn't have an opportunity to discuss the fight over the South Dakota penitentiary and the relocating of that penitentiary. And I think that that is important to talk about because it's another point of division, especially when talking about Larry Roden. This is what has been taking up a lot of Larry Roden's time and energy over the past couple of months, where the original South Dakota penitentiary was built before South Dakota was a state. It's over 150 years old, and it desperately needs to be replaced. During Nome's administration, before she resigned and became Secretary Nome, there were plans in place to build a new South Dakota penitentiary on some farmland south of Sioux Falls. Um, but then there was a fight over the fact that Governor Nome, before announcing that plan and beginning construction, didn't approach and seek input from the landowners around that site, who were irked about the fact that a prison would show up in their backyard. They were concerned about that might hurt property values and how that might harm their quality of life. And so there became a large no campaign against placing the prison there. And that fight eventually won. The final bill to approve the funding to construct that penitentiary went down in the South Dakota state legislature. And this is another example where the MAGA populists opposed that penitentiary site. Particularly individuals like Speaker Hansen, and the individual running as his lieutenant governor nominee, and the Nome administration, and to an extent Larry Roden as a member of that administration. Larry Roden gets into office after Governor Nome resigns, and he inherits this dispute, and he decides to go back to the drawing board, and he establishes a commission to look at the entire process, to have open public hearings, and to revisit the conversation. And eventually, they decide to scrap that site, and build the penitentiary at a different site inside Sioux Falls' city proper. And so the MAGA populists won, the more established wing of the Republican Party, which, being in Sioux Falls, didn't necessarily want the penitentiary in Sioux Falls, lost that fight. And so Larry Roden did build some connections within that MAGA populist wing in carrying the torch for them in relocating the prison. And so that has taken up a lot of Larry Roden's time. And so when you look at his campaigning going forward, I would imagine that he is not going to be talking about property taxes as much, but rather going to individuals, Republican primary voters who are belong to that more populist wing, who are rural voters, and saying, look, I didn't cave to the Sioux Falls elites and move the prison out of Sioux Falls. I stood for you. And that could be a very powerful message for him with those voters.
That's interesting. So where's the current penitentiary?
The current penitentiary is smack dab in the middle of Sioux Falls.
Okay.
It overlooks Falls Park just outside of downtown.
Okay, that's interesting because I mean, where typically you don't see penitentiaries in the main city.
Yes.
Couple reasons for that. One is the land's expensive.
Mhm.
Two, it's a bit of a blight. Let's move west,
Yes.
which the MAGA populists are right to admit, and the people pushing it being moved to rural areas or don't like to talk about. Whereas they like to
Mhm.
talk about the economic development. Look at all these great jobs that are
Yes,
going to be brought
absolutely.
there, right?
Mhm. Yes.
And the MAGA and the more rural conservatives might be like, you can take those jobs.
Yes. You can have them. We
We
don't
don't
want
we
them.
don't need them. We're good. We've got
Yeah.
beef cattle. You
Mhm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah, we prefer to grow our soybeans, and it's important to note the populist types who fought the relocation of that prison to rural Lincoln County, um, were absolutely right in that the decision to place it there was not transparent at all. The
Sure.
Doe's information, it genuinely was that surveyors started showing up near their land to start plotting out the prison site, and folks would drive past them and their pickup trucks would stop to chat with them, and that's how they found out that a prison would be built down the block.
Oh, that's terrible. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's terrible.
Mhm.
Well, this is the thing, right? That unfortunately, a lot of people in urban
Right.
areas might be thinking, "Oh, where do these where does this populist energy come from? Why are these people so mad?" And you've
Mhm.
got nobody to look at but themselves in the mirror
Yeah.
as to why
Mhm.
they're mad. All right.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So the penitentiary issue, I'm so glad you brought that up. And so Larry Roden, who successfully kept the new penitentiary within Sioux Falls, which
Yes.
is a huge political victory. That
Oh,
seems,
absolutely.
yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. The pipeline issue is dying down, and Toby Doeden is going to make this about property taxes. And so heritage
Yeah.
versus economic development. Interesting.
Mhm.
Cool. All right. And does Dusty Johnson have an opinion on the property tax thing whatsoever?
I'm not certain. Dusty Johnson hasn't been.
He's been in Washington. He
So
doesn't need to have an opinion on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Dusty Johnson's had his handful legislating in Congress. And so he's just not, and this is true on many issues. Dusty Johnson didn't have a super vocal opinion about the pipeline issue in the years when that was all consuming South Dakota politics. And so being in Washington does allow him to stay out of these fights to
Right.
an extent.
Yeah. I'm interested in representing South Dakotans in Washington. You know,
Hmm.
you guys can figure out these issues among yourselves, these local
Hmm.
issues, right? Yeah. Okay.
I think you've got a future as Dusty Johnson speechwriter.
Well,
So
okay, fair enough. Well, I mean, he does seem to be. I do have him typecast in my head. I don't even know what he looks like, but I do have him
yeah,
typecast in my head. All right.
he's big in orange ties. Whenever you visualize him in your head, Dusty Johnson always wears these bright orange ties, and so add that to your mental composite.
Interesting. I appreciate that. Okay.
Mhm.
So, And so if you were to pick right now who you think is going to win the gubernatorial primary, who's it going to be?
Mhm. That is a fantastic question. There is not a consensus choice, when you ask the smart money. Um, I not many people think that Toby Doeden or John Hanson can win because as when they're both in the race, they're just splitting that populist wing of the party. So long as they're both in the race, and I don't imagine that either of them will drop out. So long as they're both in the race, neither will win. So it's really between Johnson and Roden. And when you get right down to it, I think Larry Roden's going to win. Dusty Johnson, when you look at his primary races for Congress, not in 2024, Toby Doeden was almost his primary challenger, but ultimately didn't pursue that challenge. But in 2022 and 2020, Dusty Johnson had primary challengers, West River figures, populist figures, and he almost lost both of those primary challengers. Both of those primary challengers took about 40% of the vote against the incumbent representative, Dusty Johnson. When you look at those numbers, Dusty Johnson cannot be optimistic about his pull or his sway within the South Dakota Republican primary. And in order to win those primaries, he really has to take every establishment conservative in order to win. And he could do that when it was just him against a populist. But when he's splitting that vote with Larry Roden, I just don't think he can do it. And I think Larry Roden, at the end of the day, is going to win that primary.
Interesting. Okay, so I just want to confirm the way that the votes are counted here,
Mhm,
where the winner is determined. So
mhm,
let's say, I mean, I'm just putting this out there. Dusty
sure.
Johnson or Larry Roden wins 34% of the vote on election
Mhm,
day. Dusty
yeah,
Johnson wins 33% of the vote on election day.
yeah,
And a third place challenger wins 32% of the vote.
yeah.
Right. If it's split
Mhm.
roughly equal into thirds. All right. Larry Roden, who won 34%, is then declared the winner.
I'm looking this up because I want to make sure that I get it right.
Okay, that's probably good
Yeah.
because people do come here to figure out how to vote on election day in South Dakota.
Yes, they
Ooh,
absolutely
you
do.
know what? They might be by the time this primary is held in May or
Oh,
June.
absolutely.
Is it June?
This primary is in June.
Right. They got to
Primary.
wait to make sure the roads are clear.
So, in order to win the gubernatorial primary in South Dakota, you must have received at least 35% of the vote.
Okay.
Um, and so I imagine whoever wins this primary, I'm trying to find the that you're on. Whoever wins this primary is going to get 35% of the vote.
Right.
I don't foresee a situation in which the top vote getter is getting 27% or
Right.
something like that.
All right. No, just given the way that you've laid it out to me, Larry Roden seems like the safest pick.
Larry Roden, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, the governor's race, although it might be the most interesting currently, is not the only race that is going to be happening.
Mhm.
You have one of your Senate seats, is that correct?
Yep, Senator Mike Rounds is on the ballot for reelection, in addition to the congressional seat.
Right, the congressional seat's up every cycle. And the
Mhm.
congressional seat, the way you explained it to me earlier, was that off air, is that it is basically locked up for the
Yeah.
Republican. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown on that?
Sure. So Marty Jackley is currently the Attorney General of South Dakota. He's been the Attorney General of South Dakota for 12 of the last 16 years. Before that, he was South Dakota's U.S. Attorney, long-standing, well-respected figure within the Republican Party. Um, and he is the foremost candidate in that Republican primary. It should be noted there's an individual by the name of Casey Crabtree, who's a state senator out of Madison, who's also filed to run in that race. I don't believe Crabtree has officially announced, but even if he were to announce, let's not kid ourselves. Marty Jackley's going to win that primary. He's going to win it in a walk.
Okay. All right. So Marty Jackley is going to be the South Dakota Republican candidate, and
Mhm.
very likely they will be the new representative for South Dakota in the House of Representatives.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about the Senate. Mike Rounds.
Mike Rounds.
Okay, Mike Rounds is currently the only person in that race.
Mike Rounds is the only notable Republican. I think that there are one or two um, uh, relative nobodies running in that race, but for all intents and purposes, Mike Rounds is the only Republican running for the nomination. There is a lot of activity, and I this never happens, so it's remarkable. There is a lot of activity outside the Republican primary in that race. There is a Democrat named Julian Bodian, who is a former state trooper and a small business owner. He was President Biden's nominee to be U.S. Marshal in South Dakota. He is running in the Democratic nomination, and he is unopposed. But there is also an independent who used to be a Democrat, Brian Bangs, who was formerly a member of the JAG Corps and formerly a Democratic senatorial nominee for South Dakota's other Senate seat previously, is running as an independent in that race. And Brian Bangs's hoped for paradigm is in multiple states across the Midwest and the Mountain West, in Nebraska notably, and in Kansas and in Utah. Uh, Non-Republicans have been able to run close Senate contests by not running a Democrat and instead running a Democrat-ish independent.
Sure.
Dan Osborne pretty famously came very close actually to beating Deb Fischer by running as an independent in that senatorial contest. And there was Evan McMullen in Utah and some other examples. That is what Brian Bangs is trying to do. He has two problems. One, he used to be a Democrat. And so Mike Rounds, if that race ever got close to being close, could say, look, you used to be a Democrat and then you lost. And so now you're running as an independent. How convenient. Two, there's a Democrat running. Julian Bodian is running. He is going to be on the general election ballot. And so Brian Bangs can't expect every Democrat in South Dakota to sort of hold their nose and vote for the independent in the way that Dan Osborne or McMullen or Dan Osman in Kansas could. He is going to have competition from his left and from his right, and that simply isn't a winnable race for Brian Bangs as it is currently construed.
Right. Okay.
Mhm.
However, that is the Democrats are not Mike Rounds' problem.
No, absolutely not.
There's a certain secretary in Washington who is looking
Yes.
very hungrily at this Senate race
Yes.
in South Dakota.
There is a constant stream of rumors coming out of Washington that either Secretary Noem is sick of being the Secretary of Homeland Security, or that President Trump or members of the Trump administration don't like her performance. And so soon she will not be the Secretary of Homeland Security, and instead she will challenge Mike Rounds. At every turn, Secretary Noem or individuals within the administration have denied these rumors. But the simple fact that they keep coming, that despite all of these denials, they keep happening, is indicative of something. It is indicative of the fact that it makes political sense for Secretary Noem to leave that job and to run for Senate. And it makes sense for a few reasons. One, this is really Secretary Noem's last chance to be a senator from South Dakota until 2032, because the other Senate seat in South Dakota is held by John Thune, who's currently the Senate Majority Leader and who is not, there's no successful primary challenge against John Thune while he's in that position. And so if Secretary Noem were to pass this opportunity up, she would have to wait for this Senate seat to come up again in 2032 to run for it. Well, her gig as Secretary of Homeland Security will only run until 2028, at which point she will be forced to either run for president and take her chances in what is likely to be an incredibly packed Republican primary, or wait for 4 years for that Senate seat to come up again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. In the last podcast we did, one of the things that you did one of the ways that you described Kristi Noem when she was governor in that she needed to approve everything. She was the
Mhm.
hardest worker in the room,
Yes, absolutely.
and that she would, but that she wanted to make sure that she was in control of every file at all times.
Mhm.
Most of the criticism, and which would turn out to be very prophetic that you said that, because so much of the criticism that comes from Republicans about national Republicans about her tenure as in the department as Secretary of Homeland Security has been that
Mhm.
she needs to micromanage everything,
Yes.
and that any purchase that's over $100,000 or any expense over $100,000 needs to be fully approved by her.
Mhm.
And department the size of DHS, as you can imagine, is constantly making purchases over $100,000, and so stuff gets
Correct.
backed up. That's been one of the criticisms, that stuff gets backed up. Um, and so, she's certainly prominent enough. I think she could run for president, but I don't know that
Mhm.
she has the friends to do it.
No. And I looking at that primary, certainly she would not be I would not be surprised if she was nominated. There are just too many other individuals who I would not be surprised if they were nominated. It could be JD Vance, it could be Marco Rubio. And part of the problem is she now has to compete with so many people who have a very similar resume to her. She has to compete with so many people who are also members of the Trump administration. And so another thing is, in order to distinguish herself from that other cadre of Republican presidential hopefuls, she has to do something outside the Trump administration. And she just can't do that, is a member of the administration.
Yeah, I also think it allows. I think it also, one of the things is that it allows for her to put some distance between her and the administration if she had to, if she's
Mhm.
senator,
Yes. Absolutely,
so
absolutely,
that in future, for like to set up a future run.
mhm, especially as President Trump's approval rating, um, continues to go down, within not just the country at large, but within Republican primary circles.
Yeah. No,
Mhm.
it'll, it's a good chance to get off the shit.
Absolutely,
Which, by the way, would be true in every second term of any president. There's nothing actually
oh,
unique about Trump in this case.
absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
okay. So if she were to run against Mike Rounds, what are her chances?
I think she wins, to be perfectly honest. I think that the, expanded donor base that she brings, to the table, having that national profile, and I think that the profile that she has, Kristi Noem is all-encompassing in South Dakota politics. Everybody has an opinion about Kristi Noem, and within Republican primary circles, evidently she's well liked. She kept winning these primaries. She beat Marty Jackley, who we discussed previously, in the 2018 Republican primary for governor. And Mike Rounds has been around for a long time. He's a very competent senator. He's recently made a name for himself on AI issues, very well respected, but he just doesn't have Kristi Noem's name recognition. He just does not arouse the passion that Kristi Noem does amongst her supporters.
And he's not going to be able to raise money in Florida.
Absolutely, absolutely not.
Mhm.
And so even if you went on a street in Sioux Falls, downtown, you couldn't do it right now. There's nobody on a street in Sioux Falls. It's too cold today. But if you did it in May, and if you asked 100 Republican primary voters, who are South Dakota's members of the US Senate, the most common answer by far would be John Thune and that one guy. And so, given that fact, Mike Rounds is certainly a very competent senator, a very respected senator, but I don't think he wins that primary against Kristi Noem. I just don't think I don't think he has the profile.
Fair enough. Well, I think we've talked ourselves into, if Kristi Noem's political people, who I think includes Corey Lewandowski, if they're listening, and Corey Lewandowski would know better than anybody,
Sure.
um, if they're listening, that I think we've talked ourselves into this Kristi Noem basically has to run in this Senate race, in this
Oh,
Senate primary.
absolutely. Mhm.
Uh,
I think it makes all the political sense in the world for her to run in this primary.
Interesting. All right. Well, you know what, Jack? I don't want to take up any more of your time. I think that's been a really fantastic conversation for a first attempt at videoing a Thursday.
Absolutely.
We're still learning this technology, folks, so please bear with us
Mhm.
as we bring the best technology of 2025 to you just in time for 2026.
We're coming into the 21st century hot,
Yeah,
folks.
exactly. Exactly. Coming in for 2026, it's going to be the most exciting political year in about a year.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. That's a good way to put it.
yeah. All right, Jack. Well, thank you very much, and we'll we know you'll be on next week, so we'll see you then.
Sounds good. See you.